our live teaching learning session of BECC 132 Principles of Microeconomics 2. Today is the last session of this paper BECC 132 and India's trade policy. In this block 4 and unit 11, the main topic is WTO. In previous session, we had discussed different theories of international trade. And international trade is very important for each and every country because at present all the economies are open economies and all economies have relationship with rest of the world. So every economy engaged in international trade and all countries are getting advantages or gains from trade because there is a difference in the availability of natural resources, human resources, and capital resources. No one country is rich in all types of resources. In some countries, there is more availability of natural resources. But on the other hand, some countries have more human power but lack of capital formation. So how they can fulfill their all requirements with the availability of scarce resources? When resources are scarce and wants are unlimited, then how we can satisfy unlimited wants with the help of limited resources? The main solution of this problem is to do international trade because through exports and imports we can fulfill our demand for those goods which are not available in our country, and we can export those goods which are abundant in supply. So international trade play a very important role in each and every country's growth and development. Now in international trade, what is the importance of WTO or what is the meaning of this World Trade Organization, how it formed and what are the principles of WTO and how different member countries of WTO uh, engaged in this WTO committee and how this WTO helps in member countries for engaging in international trade. So in today's session, we will discuss about WTO, the background of WTO, before the origin of WTO, what was the previous name of this organization and how it was formed and what are the principles and significance and different agreements of WTO. And we will discuss about India's trade policy in which WTO play very important role. So let us start from first topic. What is WTO? WTO is World Trade Organization. It is an organization that intends to supervise and liberalize international trade. So WTO is an organization which supervise and liberalize international trade. It promotes free trade policy without any restrictions, without any hurdles or obstacles imposed by the government. So each and every country can do easily international trade or exports and imports. Before the origin of WTO, it was known as GATT. GATT. GATT means the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs. It's a multilateral agreement regulating international trade. According to its preamble, its purpose is the substantial reduction of tariffs Tariffs means import duties or import taxes and other trade barriers, and the elimination of preferences on a reciprocal and mutually advantageous basis. It was negotiated during the United Nations Conference on Trade and Employment and was the outcome of the failure of negotiation, negotiating governments to create the International Trade Organization. GATT was signed in 1947 and lasted until 1993 when it was replaced by the WTO, World Trade Organization, in 1995. The original GATT text, which was originated in 1947, is still in effect under the WTO framework, subject to the modifications of GATT 1994. India was the founder member of GATT, and GATT was formed in 1947. But GATT was uh, the narrow aspect of international trade, but WTO is a broader aspect of international trade, and WTO formed in 1995. Before the origin of WTO or before the modifications of GATT, it was previously known as GATT, General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, which was established in 1947, and India was the founder member of GATT. At that time, near about 23 countries were the member countries of GATT. But at present, WTO, near about 155 or around 160 countries are the member countries of WTO. So WTO is a very broader concept, and it determines the rules and regulations regarding international trade. WTO is World Trade Organization. It's an organization that intends to supervise and liberalize international trade. The origin organization officially commenced on January 1st, 1995 under the Marrakech Agreement, replacing the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs (GATT), which was commenced in 1948. The organization deals with the regulations of trade between participating countries. It provides a framework for negotiating and formalizing trade agreements and a dispute solution process aimed at enforcing participants' adherence to WTO agreements, which are signed by representatives of member governments and ratified by their parliaments. The WTO has 153 members representing more than 97% of the total world trade and 30 observers, most seeking membership. The WTO is governed by a ministerial conference meeting every 2 years, a general council which implements the conference policy decisions and is responsible for day to day administrations, and a director general who is appointed by the ministerial conference. The WTO's headquarters is at the Center William Airport, Geneva, Switzerland. The main headquarters is in Switzerland. So this is the brief description of WTO. Next is how WTO formed. The WTO formed in 19 95, but earlier it was known as GATT. The GATT was the only multilateral governing international trade agreement from 1948 until the WTO was established in 1995. The GATT managed to operate for almost half a century as a semi institutionalized multilateral treaty regime on a provisional basis. 7 rounds of negotiations occurred under the GATT. The Tokyo round during the 70s was the first major attempt to tackle trade barriers that do not take the form of tariffs and to improve the system, but the agreements were not accepted by all the members nation of GATT. These agreements and policies were amended in Uruguay round, leading to acceptance by the member countries and formation of WTO. This final act, concluding the Uruguay round and officially established the WTO regime, was signed in 1994 at Marrakesh, Morocco, and hence known as Marrakesh Agreement. So, this is the description of how WTO is formed and what is the history behind the formation of WTO. Now, what are the main features of WTO? Features or characteristics of WTO are: number one is it is an international organization which promotes multilateral trade agreements. You know, trade may be unilateral, trade may be bilateral, and trade may be multilateral. If only one country is engaged in international trade and one country is doing trade, that is called unilateral trade or one sided trade. If two countries are doing international trade, that is called bilateral trade. And if different countries or more than two countries are involving in this international trade, that is called multilateral trade. So, at present, WTO is an organization which promotes multilateral trade. It promotes free trade without any restrictions from the government, and by removing tariffs and non-tariff barriers. In non-tariff barriers, we include uh, import quotas, and non-tariff barriers is quotas, and tariff barrier is import duty. So, if we promote free trade agreements, it means we are reducing tariffs barrier and non-tariff barriers in international trade. It includes trade in goods, trades in services, protection of intellectual property rights, and foreign investment, etc. It is not the member of United Nations. All the WTO members have equal voting right. So these are the features of WTO. Now next is, why do we need WTO, or what role WTO play in international trade? So the main need of WTO is that if we want to make peaceful atmosphere while doing international trade, WTO support and WTO promotes international peace. International peace by helping the trade to flow smoothly and dealing with disputes over trade issues. So, international trade, if we want to do peacefully without any dispute, without any obstacles, then there is a need of WTO which can solve all the disputes and which can solve all the issues which is related to international trade very easily, and international trade can flow smoothly. Now next is risk reduction. Confidence to nations to do more and more trade, thereby stimulating economic growth. So WTO play very important role for easy flow of and smoothly flow of goods and services to the rest of the world, and WTO reduce the risk which involved in the international trade agreements. So WTO is very necessary. That's why we can define the need of WTO with the help of these points. Now next is objectives of WTO. What are the main objective? What are the main purpose or main goal of WTO? The main goal of WTO is to implement the new world trade system as visualized in the agreements. Next is it promotes world trade in a manner that benefit every country, not only single country or some countries can take advantages from international trade. WTO promote benefits that each and every country can get benefit from international trade. It ensures that developing countries secure a better balance in the sharing of the advantages resulting from the expansion of international trade corresponding to their developmental needs. WTO demolish all the hurdles, all the obstacles to an open world trading system and usher in international economic renaissance because the world trade is an effective instrument to foster the economic growth. World trade, international trade is very necessary if we want to achieve higher economic growth. So WTO remove all the hurdles, all the restrictions, all the obstacles of international trade, and it promote international trade, and it promotes that each and every country can get advantages from doing this international trade. It enhances competitiveness among all trading partners so as to benefit consumers, and it helps in global integration. At present, global integration is known as globalization, and India is also a globalized country. At present, all of the countries are moving towards globalization, and globalization increases the integral relationship with rest of the world. We can increase the integral relationship with other nations or rest of the world. It helps in promoting international trade, and it helps in getting more advantages, more benefits to the producer and consumers by doing this international trade. WTO increases the level of production and productivity with a view to ensuring level of employment in the world, because when international trade is possible, when all countries are engaged in the system of international trade, then there is no such problem arise or like overproduction problem and underproduction problem. Because if you can produce more, if you have produced more, then you can easily export those goods to the other nation who have deficiency of that product. So overproduction problem and underproduction problem can be solved with the help of international trade. So WTO promotes international trade, and remove all the hurdles which was previously exist or before the origin of WTO existed in international trade. It expands the utilized world resources to the best. We can fully utilize or optimally utilize or maximum utilize all the available resources. WTO promote uh, to whole world that whole world economies should use their available resources in a ideal or optimal manner. It improved the living of level of living for the global population and speed up economic development of the member countries. So these are the main objectives of WTO. Next is WTO principles. What are the various principles on which WTO works? The principles of WTO are: number one is transparency. There should be a transparency related to all agreements and rules and regulations of international trade. There should be a transparency and no corruption exists in these trade agreements. Second principle is environmental protection. WTO promote those rules and regulations and those policies which are eco-friendly. WTO promote to use those technologies for the production of goods and services which are eco-friendly and which are not affecting badly to the environment level. Next is WTO promote competition among the different countries, because at present whole world is a competitive world, and the competition, the benefit of this competition is that consumer will get goods and qualitative goods at lower prices, and producer always interested to produce more output to increase its goodwill or image in a world market. So it increases competition level, and it promotes free trade agreements. It is based on free trade principle in which WTO always promote that there should be no restrictions, no barriers while doing international trade. Government should not impose any restrictions. Trade should be easily, or trade should be possible very easily without any hurdles of the restrictions like trade tariff barriers or non-tariff barriers. It reduces these types of barriers which are the main obstacle of international trade. So WTO treatment is different in some countries, like MFN treatment is most favored nation treatment, national treatment. So WTO principle is to do fair work and to participate and to make all the rules and regulations equally for all the nations. But sometimes we can see that WTO make those policies, those rules and regulations which is good for their most favored nation but against for developing nations. But the principles of WTO is to work in a transparent manner and to remove all the hurdles or barriers in international trade, and the treatment like most favored nation and national treatment should remain same or equal, and to increase the competition in world market, and to protect the environment, which is very necessary for the achievement of sustainable development. So these are the principles of WTO. Now next is functions of the WTO. What are the various functions of WTO, or why we formed this WTO? The main purpose or the main functions of WTO is to ensure that trade flow as smoothly, predictably, and freely as possible. Second is administering trade agreements. WTO agreements cover goods, services, intellectual property rights like patent right, copyright, trims, etc. Acting as a forum for trade negotiations. WTO reviewing national trade policies. WTO settling trade disputes if any dispute arises among the different WTO member countries while doing international trade. WTO solve the disputes. WTO settle one dispute settlement board which handle these disputes and which solve all the problems which arises among the member nations of WTO for free flow of goods and services among the different countries. So WTO settling trade dispute. Importantly, WTO set procedures to settle disputes. WTO assisting developing countries in trade policy issues through technical assistance and training programs. So these are the functions of WTO. Now next is, what is the scope of WTO, or what is the significance of WTO? The scope of WTO, in this we include trade in goods. If we are trading goods and services, and beyond goods and services, we are trading with among the different nations like trade related investment measures, general agreement on trade in services. In these all agreements, there is a good scope of WTO. Without WTO, we can't do smoothly trade among the different countries, and WTO sets some rules and regulations, some agreements through which each and every country can work smoothly without any restrictions, without any obstacles. So there is a great scope of WTO while doing trade in services, while doing trade in goods and trade related intellectual property rights. In short form, we can say that TRIPS and trade related investment measures, which is known as TRIMS, and GATS, that is General Agreement on Trade in Services. So this is the scope of WTO. Now, significance of WTO. The World Trade Organization is the only international organization that deals with global rules and regulations of trade between different nations. It provides a framework for conduct of international trade in goods and services. It lays down the rights and obligations of government in the set of multilateral trade agreements. So WTO is play very significant role in international trade because it deals with global rules of trade between nations. Next is, what are the various agreements on which WTO works, and WTO supports what type of agreements uh, for engaging in international trade, what type of agreements suggested by WTO, and what agreements involved in WTO. So there are different types of agreements like trade in agriculture. We know that there are three sectors which exist each and every country, like primary sector, which is related with agriculture and its allied activities. Next is secondary sector, which is known as manufacturing sector or industrial sector, which produces finished goods with the help of raw material. Third is service sector, in which all services like banking, insurance, transportation, communication, etc. are included. So agreements, trade related intellectual property rights, trade related investment measures, general agreement in trade in services, dispute settlement for resolving the disputes. WTO settle a dispute settlement board which solve the problems which arises while doing international trade, and agreements on of export subsidies and anti-dumping agreements. Trade in agriculture, here is the agreement of AOA, means agreement on agriculture, and trade in textiles and clothing, TRIPS, TRIMS, GATS, dispute settlement, agreement of export subsidies, and anti-dumping. What is the meaning of dumping? Dumping is a system, dumping is a way in which a country can sell its product in abroad at a lower price and sell its product in domestic market at higher price. When country attempt this type of activity, like in domestic market price is higher, but in abroad price is lower, but the product is same. This is known as price discrimination. But if price discrimination held by the country in different nations, or if a country use this anti-dumping dumping policy, like that you can't discriminate the price among the different nations, price discrimination is not supported by WTO. So anti-dumping agreements always favored by WTO. These are different agreements on which WTO works. Now next is India and WTO. You know that India is a founder member of General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs. It was formed in 1947, and its successors, the World Trade Organization, which came into effect on 1st January 1995 after the conclusion of the Uruguay round. India's participation in an increasingly rule-based system in the governance of international trade is to ensure more stability and predictability, which ultimately would lead to more trade and prosperity for itself. And the 149 other nations which now comprise the WTO. But at present, the number of member countries has increased and also increasing. India also automatically avails of MFN, Most Favored Nation, and national treatment for its exports to all WTO members. So India is the founder member of GATT. That's why India is working with GATT and WTO from since 1947. WTO and the agreements on agriculture. The first agreement of WTO is Agreement on Agriculture. The Agreement on Agriculture came into effect with the establishment of the WTO at the beginning of 1995. The central feature of the Agreement on Agriculture is the reduction in production subsidies paid by developed countries to their farmers, and the rolling back of some of the non-tariff barriers which have restricted agricultural trade. WTO always supports that there should be there should be removal of tariffs and non-tariff barriers. And WTO suggests that there should be reduction in production subsidies because subsidies is a negative tax. If government provides subsidies, it will increase the uh, income burden of government. That if government pay more, if government expenditure will be more rather than their level of income, then budget will be in deficit. So the agreement on agriculture in this WTO, this is mainly effective at the beginning of the WTO in 1995, and the central feature of this AOA is the reduction in production subsidies paid by developed countries to their farmers, and the rolling back of some of the non-tariff barriers which have restricted agriculture trade. Now next is TRIPS. TRIPS is Trade Related Intellectual Property Rights. The WTO's Intellectual Property Agreement amounts for rules for trade and investment in ideas and creativity. The rules state how copyright, patent right, trademarks, geographical names used to identify the products, industrial design, integrated circuit, layout design, and undisclosed information such as trade secrets. So, intellectual property should be protected when trade is involved. In nutshell, the TRIPS agreement covers 7 categories of intellectual property. So WTO sets 7 categories in TRIPS like trade related intellectual property right. It promotes ideas and creativity. It enhances the trade of good ideas, good creativity. If any country discover or innovate any new idea or any new product, then WTO provide patent right, copyright, and trademark. And under this TRIPS agreement, uh, goods can be traded with the help of these trade agreements. So WTO, this TRIPS agreement cover 7 categories of intellectual property, and WTO sets some rules for trade and investment in these ideas or new ideas, innovative ideas and creativity. Next is GATS. GATS is General Agreement on Trade in Services. Services means like banking, insurance, transportation, communication. These are known as services. So banks, insurance firms, telecommunications companies, tour operators, hotel chains, and transport companies looking to do business abroad can now enjoy the same principles of freer and fairer trade that originally only applied to trade in services and goods. The rules and regulation which applied on the trading in goods, that is also same apply on services. It means the same principles of like freer or free trade and fair trade that originally only applied to trade in goods, that is also applicable at present on services also. So these principles appear in the new generalized by the rules and regulations which is set by WTO in 1995. The WTO has both favorable and non-favorable impact on Indian economy. Now, what are the main favorable impact? on Indian economy of WTO. First and greater impact of WTO on Indian economy is it increases it has increased the export earnings, growth in merchandise exports. Merchandise exports means goods exports. The establishment of the merchandise products has increased the exports of developing countries because of reduction in tariffs and non-tariffs trade barriers. India's merchandise or goods trade have increased from 32 billion US dollar in 1995 to 185 billion US dollar in 2008-2009. To see this data, it is clear that with the help of WTO, Indian economy get advantages and Indian economy foreign exchange increased and the earning from international trade increased from 1995 to 2008-2009 due to this WTO. So WTO give some positive effects on Indian economy like increase in exports earning by increasing the merchandise exports of the product. Next is negative impacts. Negative impacts, you know that each and everything has some pros and cons. So it has some negative impacts. So what are the negative impacts? Like trips, the agreement on trips at Uruguay round weighed heavily in favor of multilateral or multinational corporations and developed countries as they have hold a very large number of patents because developed countries have more capital intensive technologies. They are spending lots of money in research and development. That's why this TRIPS agreement or trade related intellectual property right agreement, which was started at Uruguay round, weighed heavily in favor of multinational corporations and developed countries as they hold a very large number of patent rights. So agreements on TRIPS will work against India in several ways and it led to monopoly of patent holding multinational corporations. As a member of WTO, India has to comply with standards of TRIPS. Then India can get advantages. Otherwise, developed countries and multinational corporations will take advantages of this TRIPS agreement, which was set by WTO in 1995. Now, next is we can explain advantages and disadvantages of WTO in these with the help of these points. Number one is the advantages of WTO is it provides an opportunity to India for trading with other member countries. Next is availability of foreign technology to India at a less cost or reduced cost can be possible only with the help of this WTO rules and regulations. Number three is it gives technical assistance and training for developing countries so that developing countries can achieve higher economic growth and they can do well for the success of their country, for the achievement of high growth in their country. But there are some disadvantages also and negative impacts of WTO in Indian economy. Number countries is low. It means most of the developed countries are getting more benefit from this WTO rather than developing countries. We know that in WTO, but developed countries are getting more advantages, more benefits from WTO. Second is many laws of WTO are unfavorable to the developing countries, like reduction in subsidies in agriculture sector, which was set by WTO to developed countries, that developed countries should reduce the subsidies. Developed countries can reduce subsidies to their farmers. There will be no such impact on their economies. But if developing countries reduce subsidies on agriculture sector, then farmers' condition will go bad. And because Indian farmers are not very rich, they don't have lots of money to produce larger output. They need some support from the government. So India can't follow this, like less or reduction in subsidies in agriculture sector. This is against this rule is against developing country, but in favor of developed countries. So many laws of WTO are unfavorable to the developing countries, and it supports the developed countries. Third is certain clauses of WTO agreements on agriculture, but restrictions on the provision of subsidized food grains in India. So there are some advantages and disadvantages of WTO in India. Now, next is WTO agreements and policies. You know, WTO at present is based on all types of goods and services, goods in which we include all merchandise or all visible products. It all began with trade in goods from 1947 to 1994. GATT, General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, was the forum for negotiating lower customs duty rates and other trade barriers. Services. These principles appear in the new General Agreement on Trade in Services, GATS. Intellectual property. The WTO's intellectual property agreements amount to rules for trade and investment in ideas and creativity. And dispute settlement is a board which is set by WTO for the settlement of all disputes which arises among the different member countries while doing international trade. Now, arguments in favor of WTO: it increases foreign trade, it increases in agriculture exports, it increases in flow of foreign investment, it improves the trade in services also. It is benefited for the clothing and textile industry, and inflow of better technology and better quality product can be possible with the help of this WTO. So these are the different various arguments in favor of WTO, which is common for all member countries, not only for Indian economy context. Now, cons are: industrialized countries get more advantages than the poor countries and don't allow the participation of developing countries. So there is a percentage this through this pie chart here. Agriculture agreements are like 8%, and TRIPS agreements gets 3%. TRIPS agreements are 3%, gets general agreements on trade in services are like 2%. Other agreements share is 13%, and GATT, General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, is 39%. So this is the percentage of complaints filled under selected WTO agreements. Next is most favored nations are those nations which are get more advantages. Favor granted by one country to any of its trading partner shall also be granted to all trading partners. For example, if India grants any tariff reduction benefit to Germany in any product category, then as per most favored nation, India must grant the same favor to all its trading partners in that product category. The purpose of the clause is to discourage bilateralism and encourage multilateral trade. National treatment is treating goods produced by foreign firms and local firms alike without any discrimination. And free trade means to reduce the tariff and non tariff barriers like custom duties, tariffs, import quotas, and quantitative restrictions, and essential means of encouraging free trade. Next is role of India in WTO 2025. What will be the role of India in WTO at the time of 2025? According to the WTO Secretariat report, along with the policy statement by the Government of India, India is expected to snatch most of the business deals that are presently catering the developed nations, which includes major service based industries like telecom, financial services, infrastructure services such as transport and power. The increase in availability and reduction in tariffs has promoted many developed nations to go for business with India, especially in IT, information technology sector, and IT sector. If the trend continues, then by 2025, India is expected to cater to the software and services demands of major giants of the business world. Analyzing the present relationship with the promising, promising economic growth of India, one can be sure that India is going to enjoy a very candid and bright relationship with WTO and associated member nations by 2025. Now, what is India's foreign trade? India's foreign trade is that when we do exports and imports with other nations like goods and services, that is called foreign trade. India's economic policy after independence was influenced by the colonial experience, which was seen by Indian leaders as exploitative and by those leaders' exposure to democratic socialism as well as the progress achieved by the economy of the Soviet Union. India's foreign trade was basically at the time of independence, India mainly exports raw material and imports finished goods. But at present, the situation has reversed that India is also exporting finished goods and India is importing raw material. India's economy was mostly dependent on its large internal market, with external trade accounting for just 20% of the country's GDP. Until the liberalization policy of 1991, India was largely and internationally isolated from the world market. To protect its economy and to achieve self reliance, foreign trade was subject to import tariffs, export taxes, and quantitative restrictions. So, India's domestic policy always tends to promote protectionism of uh, Indian economy, doing international trade with different countries who are the trading partners of Indian economy. This tells us by direction of trade. Now, next is what is foreign trade policy? Foreign trade policy is a policy which is known as export import policy. The Union Commerce Ministry Government of India announces the integrated foreign trade policy every 5 years. This is also called EXIM policy or export import policy. The foreign trade policy, which was announced in on August 28, 2009, it is an integrated policy for the period 2009 to 14. This policy is updated every year with some modifications and new schemes. New schemes come into effect on the first day of the financial year, for example, April 1st. Now, India's foreign trade policy mainly promotes exports and discourage imports, and it removes hurdles and restrictions of international trade. And this trade policy at present is promoting digital India, make in India, skill India, and giving more stress or more focused on this type of strategy like free trade policy, make in India, digital India, skill India initiatives, and higher level of supports for exports of defense, farm, produce, and eco-friendly products. Next is India's trade policy 2009 to 14, and criticism of this trade policy because some countries with lower barriers to international trade experiences faster economic progresses. Now we can conclude from today's session that we have discussed about WTO and India's trade policy. WTO is a agreement where the member countries comes and talks together and share their grievances in order to resolve their problems related to international trade. So the countries make their decisions through various councils and committees whose membership consists of all WTO members. The system helps peaceful international trade by handling dispute of member countries. It provides free trade which cuts the cost of living and provide more choices of products and qualitative products and stimulate economic growth. So WTO play very important role in international trade. Thank you.